You're listening to The Secrets of Doctor Who, where we discuss everything about the hit BBC series Doctor Who. And today we're discussing the fourth Doctor story, the Ribos operation. I'm Dom Bettinelli, and joining me today on the panel are Father Cory Sticha. Hey, Father Cory.
How's it going?
And Jimmy Akin. Hey, Jimmy.
Howdy, Dom.
Folks, be sure to get your very own Secrets of Doctor Who t-shirt or phone case or more by visiting sqpn.com/merch. Yeah, we got a great design, and we hope you'd be interested in maybe getting a shirt or a case or a mug or something along those lines. Stick around to the end of the episode. We have some listener feedback on some previous episodes, and be sure to check out another show on the StarQuest Network you're sure to enjoy called The Secrets of Stargate. And you can find that wherever fine podcasts are found, or at sqpn.com/Stargate. So let's talk about the Ribos operation. Jimmy, can you give us a recap?
This week, the Fourth Doctor and K9 are commissioned by the White Guardian of the Universe to search out the 6 segments of the Key to Time and reassemble them. The Key to Time is an immensely powerful artifact that is needed to rebalance time itself. The segments are disguised and can appear as anything, anywhere in the universe. The Doctor is given a locator device to help find the segments and restore them to their true forms. He's also given a new assistant, Romana, a time lady from Gallifrey, to help him. But they must beware the Black Guardian, who also seeks the Key to Time. Together, the Doctor, Romana, and K9 go to the planet Ribos. There, they stumble into a confidence trick that is being played by 2 humans named Garen and Unstoff, who have come to the medieval planet Ribos planning to sell it, meaning sell Ribos. The mark of the con game is the Graf Vindicay, a former interstellar tyrant who wants a planet where he can build an army and then reclaim his kingdom. To sweeten the deal, Garen and Unstoff convince him that Ribos contains mines for a valuable mineral named Jethric, using an actual piece of Jethric that they've planted among the crown jewels. The Doctor and Romana also realize that the piece of Jethric is the hidden segment to the Key to Time. Garen and Unstoff's con goes sideways, and the Graf realizes he's been tricked. He becomes increasingly irrational and violent and starts killing people in cold blood. He plans to leave Ribos and blast it from orbit. First, though, he needs to get his money and the Jethric back. This leads him and everybody else in the story into a confrontation in the catacombs under the city. A local shaman, a woman known as the Seeker, has prophesied that all in Graf's party but one are doomed to die. And they all do die, except for the Graf and one of his guards. The Graf gives the guard a bomb so that he can sacrifice himself while the Graf escapes and thus fulfills the prophecy. But the guard was really the Doctor in disguise, and he switched the bomb for the Jethric. So the Graf strolls off, raving madly and calling out for one of his dead assistants before exploding. Afterwards, the Doctor and Romana use the locator device to transform the Jethric back into its true form as the first segment of the Key to Time. And as the Doctor observes, there are just 5 more to go. The end. Dom, you're muted.
Sorry, didn't want to interrupt your recap. As we mentioned before, that the Key to Time is the sort of the theme for this season of the Fourth Doctor.
It's a MacGuffin hunt.
Yes, yeah, and so there's like all of the stories of this season are going to involve that one arc. It's sort of an early version of the arcs we see. Well, we've seen arcs like this before, but arcs what we see in the modern Who era as well. So it's interesting. This White Guardian is kind of a godlike being. First appearance is that we've never seen him before. Okay.
Yeah.
What do you think?
Obviously that the Time Lords even respect, because even the Doctor was humbled in his presence. When you kind of make a smart comment and get called for, you go, "Sorry, sir."
Yeah. I mean, when the Fourth Doctor is chastened, that he's in the presence of something. So interesting. We've seen sort of godlike beings in modern Who and in the past Who that we've kind of stumbled upon. The 13th Doctor even has stumbled on them a few times. Kind of an interesting characters, like sort of like Marvel's Celestials. Is that what we're kind of the way to look at it? What do you think?
Well, the White Guardian and the Black Guardian are sort of surrogates for God and the devil, but they're not meant to literally be God and the devil. They're meant to be co-equal powers that are enormous, but they're not really omnipotent. If the White Guardian really were omnipotent, he wouldn't even need the key to time. So he's clearly a technologically dependent entity. He's just very powerful, but he's meant to evoke God, and the Black Guardian is meant to evoke the devil on a certain level. We have seen other very powerful beings previously. One that we haven't seen the episode for yet, but that was around in the first Doctor's time, was the Celestial Toymaker, who could sort of bend reality. There's also an episode where the second Doctor goes to the realm of fiction, where fictional things are real. And we will, in the fifth Doctor's time, in Peter Davison's time, be meeting the Eternals, who are on a similar power level to the Guardians.
Okay. And those are the ones we saw in the 13th Doctor, or like members of that group in the 13th Doctor. I think there was an episode or two where they showed up. So, okay, interesting. So and the Black Guardian we've seen in fifth Doctor story with Turlough shows up.
Right, because he's what initially brings Turlough into the Doctor's life.
Okay,
this is the storyline that causes the Black Guardian to want to kill the Doctors because of the key to time story.
Because apparently, spoilers, the Doctor recovers the key to time. I'm gonna guess.
Well, he recovers it, and we'll just leave it at that for spoilers.
Yeah,
and he, as you can infer, doesn't give it to the Black Guardian.
Right. Now, the key to time itself is, it's described as a perfect cube. It maintains the equilibrium of time. It's been hidden in 6 segments. It's kind of like the Horcruxes or the Infinity Stones, or it's like you mentioned, Jimmy, a classic MacGuffin. It's a MacGuffin hunt that we're going on.
Yeah. When it's finally assembled, it's 6 segments that you put them together, and they make a clear, transparent cube that you have the locator device stuck down the middle of.
Okay. Right. And it gives someone power. Did the White Guardian explain why he needed it?
It's needed to periodically rebalance the flow of time. And so he says, if the Doctor says, well, what if I decline your offer to go find it? And what will happen to me? And he says, nothing, ever.
Yeah.
Meaning time is going to fall apart.
Right.
Exactly.
Okay. I mean, it's kind of like the classic, Joseph Campbell hero's journey, right? The call to the quest, you're given the quest, you have these obstacles to overcome, that sort of thing. So he's given a quest. He's the fourth Doctor. So interesting. And then we have the introduction of the new companion, Romana 1. She will come to be called because she will regenerate later into Romana 2. And the Doctor's...
Of course, it's like the Pope. There's no it's not Francis the First. It's just Pope Francis because there's not a Francis the Second yet. So it's just Romana now,
unless you're John Paul the First, in which case there is the first.
Yes, he called himself the First. That's
right. Yeah.
Prophetic. And the Doctor's pretty dismissive of her at first. He doesn't think much of her. He knows she knows she has some information about him, which is that he barely graduated from the Time Lord Academy, which makes him very upset that she knows this.
Yeah, he declares it's confidential information, that he got a 51% on the second attempt, whereas she got a triple first.
Oh man, yeah. Just it's funny. It's not where you graduate in class; it's that you graduate, right? That's the important thing.
This episode has several bits of dialogue that I remember from when I first saw it back in the 1970s that I just thought were very memorable. One of them is when when the Doctor first meets Romana on the TARDIS. And she says, "My name is Romana Dvarat-Ralundra." And the Doctor, who's kneeling by K9, says, "I'm so sorry about that. Is there anything we can do?" and then a little bit later, as they're leaving the TARDIS and about to embark on the adventure, the Doctor says, "Good, one more thing, your name." And she says, "What about my name?" it's too long. By the time I've called, look out, what's your name? Romana Dvorat Rolundar. By the time I've called that out, you could be dead. So I'll call you Romana. I don't like Romana.
Yeah.
Well, it's either Romana or Fred. All right, call me Fred. Good. Come on, Romana.
she gives as good as she gets. I mean, she's not intimidated by him, since she's a time lady, you know. So that's an interesting relationship there. Although he's her elder, as she points out, there's less of awe in his presence than you might get.
And she's got a healthy self-awareness, shall we say, where she knows what she knows, and of course she's the young graduate from the academy, so she's throwing out all these philosophical concepts and psychological concepts, and the doctor's like, what?
Right.
She relentlessly psychoanalyzes everybody she encounters, not just the doctor. She does it to Garen too, the con man. And just diagnoses them to their face with their psychological maladies, which is not always the greatest strategy.
It's not always welcome, and not in like the knowledge, but in the sort of the kind of relationship they have. It reminds me a bit of Donna and the 10th Doctor. That sort of she's along for the ride. She's there, but she's not an assistant. That's for certain. Like she doesn't see herself as one in that sense.
She's very much an equal to the Doctor. I mean, obviously, she's another time lord, time lady. And, so she's very much an equal, and she knows it. She's not going to put up with him making it else otherwise.
Yeah, I think it's a mix of the things. She's not a companion per se. I mean, not in the I'm here voluntarily sense, but I think she does view herself as being here to assist him, but she also thinks she's more skilled than he is in various things.
Yeah.
Incidentally, she catches him being wrong about his age. He thinks he's 756 at this point, and she insists he's 759, whereas she is almost 150.
Right. And she also she kind of insults his age, accusing him having a compensation complex, a little more of that psychoanalysis we mentioned.
Yep.
So let's talk about a little bit about Ribos, the planet itself. It's got this vaguely, I don't know, medieval Russian vibe, onion domes sort of thing.
That's because they used sets from Anna Karenina for it.
Okay, that would explain it. So we have this. It kind of all revolves around this relic room in which the crown jewels of the kingdom are held. It's interesting. We never see the king or any of the officials of Ribos, of this nation on Ribos. We just see the chief of the guard, the captain of the guard, and some other people like that. And there's this interesting ritual that they do every day, the ritual of turning out the lights, turning on the lights, and closing up the room and releasing this small dragon creature, a guard dog.
Called a Shrivenzal.
Shrivenzal, right. And I thought it was kind of an interesting set of rituals, and I like it that the atmosphere it creates and the understanding you create. So this is a complex culture; it has its own meanings and that sort of thing. So that was a really nice thing.
Yeah, I have in my notes nice, fancy medieval sets, and the planet has an elliptical orbit, which is a nice concept. So it when it's farther away from its sun, like it is now, it's very cold, and the natives call that ice time. And then when it's near the sun, it's warmer, and they call that sun time. And so they have basically two seasons that are notable on the planet: ice time and sun time, and which are like extreme versions of winter and summer, with, I guess, fairly short transitions between them. I don't know why they would be short. I think you should have 4 seasons, but they talk about 2. And I have nice snow, castles, firs. And it's interesting. So Ribos, and by the way, in terms of how to pronounce it, based on the spelling, with an American accent, you would think Ribos. But in the show, they pronounce it either Ribos or Ribos. They use both. So even they weren't consistent about it. But it's a primitive society. They haven't even discovered the telescope yet. And one of their beliefs is that the stars are ice crystals in the sky, not other suns. And we're going to meet a character named Benro, who is considered a heretic because he has speculated that the stars are not actually ice crystals, but are other suns that may have other worlds around them. And so meanwhile, Garon and Unstoff are from a technologically advanced civilization, as is the Graf Vindicay. And they can be present on this planet. They're not allowed to import technology to it because it's not yet a class 2 planet. It's a class 3 planet technologically. But they can still be here, and they can interact with people on Ribos, and they can even own Ribos as long as you don't tell the natives that you own their planet, apparently.
Apparently, yeah, they are on the lookout for folks from the Alliance Security, I think is what they call it, and the graft, that Unstoff and I call it graft because I got that stuck in my head, but the con job that Garon and Unstoff are pulling off is an interesting con that actually has its roots in some classic cons, which is we're going to trick this guy into thinking that this is a gold mine. In the old days, that was literally what they were doing, and by showing him gold, look at this gold, and you pull this giant expensive hunk of gold, and the guy will think, wow, that's real, so this must be a real gold mine or Lethric mine, and then let me give you this money for it. And that's not even that simple, because there's a complex exchange of, we're going to put a deposit down, we're going to hold it, and then they end up, the idea is steal the deposit, take back the Jathrek, and get out of town and leave the
mark.
Graph, holding the empty bag, the sort of thing. So I kind of like this complex con job that they've unfolded here, which then ropes in the Doctor and Romana, because the MacGuffin is the thing that they want. It's the central part of the con. So it was a very nice, neat story.
Yeah, and got a kick out of Unstaffa where he starts telling the whole story, supposedly as the guard, oh, my dad, he found this, and he lost the mind after, that was
the Scringe Stone. Yeah,
Scringe Stone.
Unstoff claims that the Jethric, he doesn't know that. He says he doesn't know the name Jethric. He pretends to be a local guard, and so someone from the planet, and he says that the Jethric is known to him as Scringe Stone, and if you put a piece of it around your neck, you will never get the scringes. And then he has this elaborate, which sounds great. I don't know what the scringes are, but I'm glad that this will protect you from it. And he's got this elaborate story about this story is written by Robert Holmes, and as you would expect from a Robert Holmes story in his prime, it's really good, and it's got multiple layers, and the con has multiple layers, because what they're really trying to do is sell the Graph the planet, and they bring in the Jethric just as a deal sweetener to get him to raise the price that he's willing to put on deposit for the planet, so they can steal the deposit. And then then Unstoff takes his own initiative to try to sell him a treasure map on top of the deal sweetener. So we've got a 3-level con operating here.
Yeah, and they have to break into the relic room to plant the Jethric among the relics, so that the Graph will happen to notice it there. It's not even like, here, you could buy this planet with this great Jethric mine. They plant it so that he thinks that they don't know it's got a Jethric mine that they're selling this planet for. So we can really get a great deal, and appeal to his greed in that sense. And so they plant it and then have to take it back. And it's just it's a lot of fun. It's a classic, it's almost like a classic heist movie, con movie. So I really enjoyed that part of it.
Well, you've got him cutting the glass and then being able to repair it so it looks like it's brand, it's new, that it hasn't been damaged, and and nobody, you think that you would hope the guards would notice, where did that come from? That wasn't in here before, but of course, human nature being what it is, or Ribosian nature, I guess, being what it is, they just kind of like, it's whatever.
Someone must have put it in there. Yeah.
It must have been there all along. I just didn't notice it.
Didn't notice it till now.
Incidentally, also in keeping with the way Robert Holmes writes, the two crooks are actually decent people. It's the powerful, like the Graf Vindicay and his assistants, who are actually bad people, and the two crooks who are just trying to make a living and get rich are golden hearted, especially Unstoff.
Mhm.
Garon is kind of pompous, but he's fundamentally okay. Whereas Unstoff positively becomes kind, especially in his interactions later with Binro the Heretic.
Yeah.
There's some really touching interaction between Binro and Unstoff, where Binro has been explaining why he's regarded as a heretic, and he used to be a great man, but now he's laughed out of society, and he barely survives, and he can't work anymore, and he's got this theory about about the stars being other suns, and there's a really nice, this is another nice bit of dialogue in it, where the two of them are talking, and Unstoff has started to bond with Binro, and he says, Binro, supposing I were to tell you that everything you've just said is absolutely true. There are other worlds, other suns. And Binro says, you believe it too? And Unstoff says, I know it for a fact. You see, I come from one of those other worlds. You? I thought I should tell you, because one day, even here in the future, men will turn to each other and say, Binro was right. And for Binro to hear this after years of being scorned is just incredibly moving for him.
Right.
And he decides at that moment, he doesn't realize its full implications yet, but he decides at that moment that he will do whatever he needs to do to help Unstoff, the man who finally told him he was right, and that other people would one day recognize that too. And it's a really human, really moving scene. And unfortunately, Binro is soon shot by the Graf Vindicay, but it's just very touching, the interaction of these characters.
And it's nice because it doesn't have to be the Doctor who says these things. Like, I think in a lot of modern, New Who, it's always the Doctor who's the hero of these moments, or at least one of the companions. But it's a secondary character who we'll never see again who gets to have these moments. It makes it a well layered story with some depth, and more depth than sometimes they give the audience credit for in New Who. So I kind of like that.
Well, and Garin and Unstoff are just fun characters too. I mean,
yes,
Garin is just a fun character. He's just kind of
funny. Yeah,
he's a con man, but he's just that very charismatic, fun character. Right. You like he's not a one note character.
Yeah,
I mean, either
the gentleman who played him, Ian Cuthbertson, was well known in kind of British sci-fi acting shows at the time. He did other things, like I think he's most famous for the Stone Tape, if you've ever seen that. It's about a theory that paranormal events can leave psychic impressions in buildings, like made out of stone, and so you could, if you develop a stone tape machine that will allow you to read what happened previously in a building. And that actually gave its name to a theory in parapsychology that's what hauntings are. That they're psychic impressions. They're not actually ghosts. Ghosts are real, but they're a separate thing. If you see something playing over and over, like a shadowy figure that always descends a staircase and never does anything else, it's like a recording, and the theory is that's what it is. It's a place recording, and it's known as the stone tape theory, based on the show that Ian Cuthbertson was in.
Interesting.
Yeah. Incidentally, there's another really nice bit of dialogue about Binro that I remember from childhood, where Romana and the Doctor are being asked about, who have they seen anyone suspicious, and did they believe the story about the Scringe Stone? And they're like, oh, yes, quite totally. I mean, he had a very honest face, Romana notes. And then later, the Doctor and Romana are alone, and the Doctor indicates he did not believe Unstoff's story about the Scringe Stone. And Romana says, you mean you didn't believe his story? No. But he had such an honest face. Romana, you can't be a successful crook with a dishonest face, can you?
Yeah.
And I've remembered that ever since childhood.
That's a good line. You know, another interesting line, speaking of dialogue, Graf at one point says, the Graf says, the Jethric is big enough to make a man rich beyond the dreams of avarice. And that, as a Star Wars fan, that totally reminds me of, Leia's quote to Han Solo, who responds, I don't know. I get pretty big dreams. It's not exactly the same quote, but I just thought it was funny because this episode, I think
78.
78. So, and that is that's post Star Wars. So I don't know. Maybe it's inspired by.
I believe the phrase "dreams of avarice" has a history in English literature. I don't know if it goes back to Shakespeare, but I believe it has a significant history.
Oh, okay. So at one point, the Graf kind of cottons on to what's going on, that there's a con going on, and the Doctor and Romana kind of get caught up as thought of as being accomplices to Garen, and he gets arrested, and he ends up slapping the Doctor with his glove. So the Doctor grabs his glove and slaps him back.
It's a great scene, and I wonder how much of the dialogue was improvised there, because the Graf is physically abusing Garon. He's like slapping him around, and at first he starts by just calling him names, and Garon is groveling to try to get out of it, and the Graf calls him a cringing cur. And at first the Doctor is agreeing with the Graf, presumably to ingratiate himself to the Graf and convince him he's not an accomplice of Garon's. And so he's also dumping on Garon using exactly the same words as the Graf is. So it's like, yes, you cringing cur. And then when the Graf slaps Garon, the Doctor slaps the Graf and says, "Don't slap the cringing cur."
right. That was pretty good. And so then so that's Garen and the Doctor and Romana are captured, but Unstoffe is free, and this is around the time when he meets Binro the heretic, because the guards of the relic room, at the urging of the Graf, bring in the seer, this woman, the Bone Seer, which is it's a good name.
And and I wish they had showed us more about how about her actual procedure, because bone divination is a real thing, and it exists in multiple cultures across the world. I was very interested once they mentioned her to see what's she going to do. What kind of bone divination is she going to do? One common form is where you take a collection of bones and throw them onto the ground, and then you look at the pattern that they make and derive your oracle from the pattern that the bones have made. Another, known as scapulomancy, is where you take scapula bones or shoulder bones and you manipulate them. You may, for example, burn them in a fire and then notice the way they crack and get your oracle from the way they crack. And this is used, these different methods are used and have been used since primitive times, since like prehistoric times, Stone Age times. For example, the shamans in various tribes will be assigned to do things like figure out where the game is going to be so we can go hunting. And they will then use scapulomancy to discern where the game is going to be for the hunters. So they make real life important decisions using this kind of stuff. And so knowing Robert Holmes's interest in kind of magical effect, what form of bone divination is the seeker going to use? And she didn't really use anything. She's got a couple of bones. One of them looks like a femur. The other is kind of like a femur. And she invokes the gods, and that's not unexpected. I took a whole course in paranthropology on this. But she invokes the gods, urges them to come into the bones, and then doesn't throw the bones or burn the bones, or she just kind of waves the bones.
Yeah.
And so it's like, no, this isn't any kind of bone divination that I'm familiar with. But I'm glad that they I liked seeing this, because it's a real bit of human anthropology that that Robert Holmes was picking up on. And by the way, notice how friendly Holmes is in his scripts, and he was also script editor in this period on Doctor Who, or will be script editor in the Fourth Doctor's time. But notice how similar the Seeker is to the Sisterhood of Karn.
Oh yeah,
because they've got these powers that are treated as real, and even though the Graf and his Sholak, his assistant, are initially very skeptical of the Seeker, they note that the natives on Ribos really believe that the Seeker can find people, because that's what they initially hire her to do, is find the person that stole the money. And it turns out she does have real abilities. It seems she can really find where Unstoff is, and then later she's got this prophecy that comes true. And the Graf, after seeing her abilities, comes over to believe that it's true. He just doesn't realize he's not the one that's going to live. But I found the whole thing with the Seeker fascinating, and she has a similar kind of, it's not the same color, but she has a similar kind of costume and face paint to the Sisterhood of Karn. And also the much farther down the line in New Who, in the end of time, the 10th Doctor's regeneration story, when Gallifrey comes back, there is a prophetess on Gallifrey who also has face paint and does weird things and is able to see the future. And she is called the Visionary.
Yes.
And she's very reminiscent of the Seeker in this, or the Sisters of Karn.
Right. That's right. Yeah, it was an interesting addition. Go ahead, Father Cory.
Well, I was going to say, and the Bone Shaker also has a variant on, so let it be written, so let it be done. It's it has been written, she said at the end of her vision, her prophecy, which of course it did happen.
Yes. Yeah. It is interesting how, they treat it as it's real. It happens. It works, within the show. Meanwhile, Binro, the heretic, hides Unstoff in the courtyard, and that's how they meet. But it's his kindness to Unstoff that really unlocks Unstoff's kindness to him. This Binro has nothing to gain and everything to lose from hiding this fugitive, and yet he, as a hunted man, or at least a disdained man at the bottom of society, an outcast, he welcomes in this guy, so that kindness really pays itself back in the kindness that Unstoff gives him. Meanwhile, so Garen in the Doctor and Romana hanging out in the Graf's quarters, and Garen talks about his origin. He's from Earth. In fact, at one point, the Doctor notes that Garen's got a Somerset accent, which he thought was kind of a strange thing to find on Ribos. And he's a human from Earth who had to run away when he sold Sydney Harbor to an Arab for $50 million, and his scheme was discovered when he got offended that the Arab wanted him to throw in the Sydney Opera House along with it, which, it's like, why don't you just, you're scamming him anyway? He's like, no, it's the principle of the thing. That was way too low a price for the Sydney Opera House. I like that.
Incidentally, both Garon and Unstoff change accents repeatedly. So at one point, Garon is using a Somerset accent, but at other points, he's using a much more normal. I don't know if I would describe it as a posh accent, but it's a more upper class accent than the Somerset accent. Also, Unstoff at one point tries using a Somerset accent to pretend, when he's pretending to be the local guard. And later says to Garon, "What did you think of my accent?" And Garon is like, "It froze my heart." Didn't think you were going to get away with it.
Yeah, and Garrett also reveals that they've came up with this scheme to use the Jethric to trick people into buying planets, but in the stealing the deposit from them. And it's like, it's interesting part of human nature, because that Jethric is really, valuable, but they don't just want to walk away with it and sell it and make a lot of money. They want to. They're in it for the scam. I mean, it's almost, you can almost get the sense of the scam is really what keeps them going. The con, not the money. The money's just a way of keeping score in a sense.
And Gareth said that they've done this before, that they've used that piece of Jethric multiple times for the same scam.
In fact, they sold one planet to 3 different owners using the Jethric.
Yes.
So it is. I mean, it's in Magic. The Jethric is what would be known as a prover. A prover is something that you show to someone as proof that what you're saying in the con is true.
Yeah.
And Magic is a con. You're just not typically extracting anything other than a ticket price from a person. But but it is similar. You're fooling people and it's like, how did they do that? So Magic is a less dishonest con, but you can't, if you want to do the con repeatedly, you can't give away the prover. So even though the Jethric itself is valuable and you could sell it in an emergency, you need to not do that if you want to keep the game going.
Right.
And obviously you do some of the similar tricks, if you will, in Magic as you use in the con, as we see with the Doctor twice doing some sleight of hand, where he switches the Jethric with the bomb for the graph, and then switches the rock that Gareth switched to the Doctor for the Jethric, and then switched him back.
Yes, that was a nice little double.
Yeah, and the Doctor name checks a 19th century magician and says, I was trained by this guy.
So Binro takes Unstoff under the city through a crypt, basically, and then into these catacombs that run under the city to escape from the guard and the Bone Seeker, but warns him of the dangers of the catacombs are the ice gods and the Shrivenzal. So the Shrivenzal again are the dragon-like creatures. We never actually see the ice gods, but so it's probably a legend more than any kind of reality. So that's where a lot of the subsequent action takes place. We didn't mention, by the way, the other companion right in this episode of the season, which is K9 Mark II. Apparently, so at the end of the last season, the Doctor gave the original K9 away to
Romana.
Leela. And that was apparently from behind the scenes. That K9 just didn't work very well, and it was constantly breaking down and causing problems. And they weren't going to bring back K9 until the guy who creates it assured them that we've finally got it. This is going to work. It's going to be a lot better. And so that's why we have K9 Mark II at the beginning of this season. So it was nice to have him.
Who will eventually be given to Romana too.
Okay.
One big issue with K9 Mark I is they were obviously remote controlled dogs. And the first one, the frequency that the remote control worked on, one of the biggest problems was a similar frequency that the lights and the cameras and everything would, all the equipment would emit at certain points. So then the dog would go nuts, basically.
Right.
Or stop working altogether. So they figured out a better frequency, I think, for the second dog. Are
there only 2 K9s in Classic Who?
In Classic Who, yes.
Yes.
And then the K9 comes back with Sarah Jane in the 10th Doctor.
That's a Mark III K9.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Also, in this episode, they introduced something new for K9, which is a dog whistle. So we see at the beginning of the episode, the Doctor is testing a dog whistle for K9. So now he has a way of silently summoning K9, who you don't have to have, or if you want to, I mean, K9 is basically a mobile blaster. That's K9's main function on the show, is to show up and use a ray gun to either stun someone or blast through a wall or things like, or hold people, at a distance or things like that. And you don't want this prop trundling around with you for the entire story necessarily. And so now by introducing the dog whistle, they can leave K9 in the TARDIS, which they do. K9 does not appear in episode 2 of this 4-parter. And then when K9 is needed, the Doctor can blow the whistle, which no human can hear. And so it's a secretive way of summoning K9, and he'll show up and do whatever blasting needs to be done.
Although at one point the Doctor makes the Garen and Romana cover their ears when he blows the whistle.
Yeah.
Yeah, I will disagree that he's only a mobile blaster. He's also a mobile tricorder
And
and
a mobile,
scanning as well.
and a mobile computer and computer interface. Yeah.
Yeah, that's true.
So
go ahead.
Incidentally, one thing that I like about, I mean, we've talked about how Garen and Unstoff are both nice characters. Garen has this, I mean, Unstoff has this kindness, and Garen has this kind of comic pomposity, which is fun to watch. At one point, when he and Unstoff are about to be executed by the Graf Vindicate, and they both survive, so they don't die, but at one point it looks like they're going to, and Garen says, I was going to make a touching speech, but my throat is too dry.
Yes.
And Garen is just, he's like other conmen we've seen, like later in the sixth and seventh Doctor's time, we'll meet Sabalam Glitz.
Mm.
And Sabalam, they're both conmen, but Garen is so much more entertaining than Sabalam Glitz, to my mind. Sabalam Glitz is entertaining, but he's slimier, and he doesn't have the same panache that Garen does. So I think Garen is a more successful con man as a character.
Yeah. Oh, I agree. So the Graf forces the Seeker to take them down into the catacombs to hunt down Unstoff and his money and the Jethric. But she gives that prophecy that they'll all go in, but only one will die. And this is where the Doctor, we see this one guard as they go in, who kind of is hanging behind and has to be told, come on, let's go. And of course, they don't say it, but everybody's paying attention knows that's the Doctor is dressed up.
The guards have like night helmets on, so you can't see their faces.
Right. Yeah. They're dressed appropriately for a Class 2 world, so they kind of fit in, is the idea.
Class 3.
Well,
Three, yes. Yeah.
And we know it's the Doctor because there's K9 had knocked one of the guards out, so they could escape. And we see the Doctor looking at the guard, and then the next scene we see him standing there in the knight's
and
armor,
then in case you didn't get it the first time, which if you're paying attention, you will get it. That's the Doctor. But they made it clearer, even clearer later as they're going into the catacombs. We see the guards file past us, and the last guard has the Doctor's scarf peeking out from under his robes.
It's really behind. So meanwhile, the captain of the guard of the Ribosian relic room, he's decided, I've had enough of all these people. I'm just going to seal them all up into the catacombs. Brings down this little, cannon, this mortar, basically. It's a heavy-duty little mortar. And he's going to blast this thing. I hope they covered their ears, because blasting that thing in that little space would deafen people, maybe even kill them. But seals them in.
The studio, yeah.
Yeah. So so they're all sealed in hoping that there is another entrance. Binro has revealed that there are rumored to be other entrances out of the catacombs. The Graf ends up killing the Seeker. Once they find Unstoff and Binro and Garen, and that ends up embracing the Doctor. Everyone's dead, including his right-hand man, Sherlock, and embraces the Doctor, thinking he's one of the guards, and we've talked about this before, and hands him a bomb and leaves, thinking that he's the one prophesied to survive. And you think about that, what kind of arrogant guy, and what kind, thinks that the guard's just like, oh, sure, yeah, I'll blow myself up here and save you.
And the bomb is beeping, and you hear the beeping fading out as... as he's leaving, as the Graf is leaving, and it's like, okay, obviously the Doctor no longer has the bomb, and of course he goes around the corner and poof, explosion and smoke come off of the corner.
That was
the Doctor actively killed someone in this episode.
Yes,
but plausibly self-defense, I think. I would say
the Graf was also completely nuts as he was calling for his dead lieutenant and off to war, and you could hear the voice. They also overlaid some, voices of soldiers in battle and stuff like that as he's walking away.
He was also planning on getting up into orbit and then doing planetary bombardment.
Yes. Yeah, he was, we didn't say before, but he was this tyrant who had gone off to war from his own empire, leaving his brother in charge, and, had spent years conquering and waiting in, bloody conquest. And in the meantime, his brother kind of said, you know what, you're deposed. Like, you're not welcome back. I'm going to stay in charge because you're a lunatic, a bloodthirsty lunatic. And so he was trying to build an army to get back.
Yeah, only the way Garen presents it, it wasn't the brother that claimed the throne. It was the people that said, we don't want you anymore.
Right.
You left. We like your brother better.
Yeah. So, and then, as you mentioned, at the end, we have the double switch as Garon, who tried to steal the Jethric from the Doctor and ends up the Doctor, stealing it back. So you have a double sleight of hand going on there, which was nice, and that's where we end with the Key of Time segment becoming visible, and number one is down. So, and I think in fact that's exactly what they say at the end. There is the one down, 5 to go. So, any other notes about this episode, Father Cory?
So you might have noticed that Tom Baker had a scar above his lip. That wasn't there last season.
Yeah.
It was actually due to Paul Seed's dog. Paul Seed is the actor who played the Graph. He had taught this dog a trick, and Tom Baker was trying to have the dog do the trick, and the dog bit him instead.
On the lip.
On the lip. So there's a little mark just above his lip where you could see that they had, makeuped over it, so it wasn't quite as noticeable. And you'll see that scar throughout the season. It's gone next season, but you'll see it throughout the season. But interestingly, Paul Seed himself, he after this, he gets nominated to become a director. He goes to the BBC's director school and eventually directs the British version of House of Cards. Now, people in the United States know House of Cards from the Netflix version with Kevin Spacey.
Yeah, but I know it from the British version.
Yeah,
the British version is amazing.
It's one of those shows that's been on the list to watch because I've heard it's really, really good. Yeah, so he was the director of that, among other things. I mean, you look at his list on IMDb, and it's a 10-foot long list. He's been very, very productive.
Right. Interesting. Yeah. It was. I mean, he was good. He chewed the scenery really well in this one, so that was good.
Yeah, his story arc is to become progressively. I mean, at first when we meet him, he seems a little bit ruthless, but basically sane, and then he goes crazy over the course of the episode.
Yep.
As we see more and more of what led him to be deposed.
Yeah, exactly.
I kind of wanted to know what the trick was, the dog trick. Was it like, take something from my mouth or something? I don't know.
I wonder if it was something like that. And, Tom Baker messed it up or something, or had to pick up the dog or something. The dog didn't like that, or who knows. But And I was going to say, and then speaking of dog, line I remember as a kid was Canine, don't stop at all the corners.
Yeah, right. I remember them saying that in the catacombs.
Yes, that's funny. Jimmy?
So I haven't seen, I'm aware of, but I've never seen the American version of House of Cards. But the British version, it's a set of 3. It wasn't an ongoing series. It was a set of 3 mini-series. The first one is House of Cards. The second is To Play the King, which is interesting in that so the first one, House of Cards, deals with the aftermath of Margaret Thatcher losing power or dying. And then the second one, To Play the King, is actually relevant to what's going on now because it involves the aftermath of the passing of Queen Elizabeth and her son becoming king. And how does the prime minister deal with such a king?
Right.
They don't call him Prince Charles, but he's obviously meant to be Prince Charles. And because of when it was made, Princess Diana was still alive. So there's a Diana surrogate, and there are a couple of Prince William and Prince Harry surrogates. And then the final one is called The Final Cut. And all 3 of these miniseries follow a character named Francis Urquhart, who is a minister of parliament who rises to become prime minister. And he is exceptionally ruthless. It is just amazing. And he also talks to the audience regularly, commenting on the people around him. And it's it's really a study in ruthlessness,
Power,
and power and manipulation and all kinds of stuff. And it's especially the I think the first two are better than the third. The first one is just genius, but it's well worth watching. And Francis Urquhart also has a catchphrase that he uses whenever someone asks him something and he wants to say yes, but he doesn't, but he wants plausible deniability. What he will say is, "You might think that. I couldn't possibly comment."
Yeah.
Yeah, the Kevin Spacey version one had a lot of that similar, where he talked to the audience and, extremely ruthless, rises from Congress to president. That went on for 6 seasons, but I only watched like the first 3 seasons. And once he got ejected from the show because of his off-screen misbehavior. Yeah. It wasn't as good, from what I hear. So it kind of faded quickly. I mean, you got rid of the main character. It wasn't going to work, but he was also Frank
Underwood.
That's what it was. Frank Underwood.
Right.
So Francis
from
Francis
Kentucky.
Urquhart.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think he was from Kentucky. I think he was like a senator from Kentucky originally.
Georgia Beach.
Okay.
Yeah. Anything else, Jimmy?
In the British version, he was from the Shires, so he was an upper crusty, but from the boonies.
Right.
Oh, from the Shire and Underwood.
Yeah, Underhill.
Coincidence.
Yeah, it could be.
Also, his initials, Francis Urquhart, would be occasionally used to comedic effect by the British tabloids.
Yeah.
F you to PM.
Right.
Things like that.
Yes. And thus Frank Underwood had the same, the initials. Anything else on this story, Jimmy, before we go to our feedback? So we have some feedback we got from our listeners. First feedback comes from our episode 301 on the Curse of Fenric, which was the 7th Doctor. Paul Leone wrote on YouTube, "Wow, Ultima, that's a deep cut. Love those games back in the day. I once saw a cheap werewolf movie that used the Gargoyle script from Ultima 6, presumably without permission. Great podcast as always. I'll definitely check this story out." So
I love Ultima. That was I grew up playing those games, especially Ultima 4 and 5. I played the heck out of those. I love them.
If you're a computer nerd of a certain age.
Yes.
And then our other feedback comes on our episode 284. So going back a bit to the 12th Doctor story, Listen. Jim wrote via email, "I wanted to add, there's a novel in which Sherlock Holmes, a previously unknown second brother, and Dr. Watson meet the Doctor, Ace, and Bernice called All-Consuming Fire. It's also a Big Finish story." So something to check out. All right. Excellent. Well, thank you both. We love to get feedback from listeners. We want to take a moment to thank our patrons who make it possible for us to create The Secrets of Doctor Who, including Dennis S., Ryan, Tobias B., Olivia A., and Matthew C. Their generous donations at sqpn.com/give make it possible for us to continue The Secrets of Doctor Who and all the shows at StarQuest, and you can join them by visiting sqpn.com/give. And we'd like to thank Victor Lambs, who edited this episode. So that's it from us. We'd love to hear what you think of the Ribos operation, this 4th Doctor story. You can let us know by commenting on the show at sqpn.com, the Secrets of Doctor Who Facebook page, send an email to drwho@sqpn.com, or visit the StarQuest Discord community at sqpn.com/discord. We'll be back next time when we'll be discussing the 1st Doctor story, The Time Meddler. Until then, Jimmy Akin, thank you for joining me and sharing the secrets of Doctor Who.
Thanks, Tom.
Father Cory Sticha, thank you as well.
Thank you, Dom.
And once again, I'm Dom Bettinelli. Thank you for listening to the Secrets of Doctor Who on StarQuest. And remember, there's no comfort in dying. It's the last thing I want to do.